Hi, it's me, the guy who finally got a mic stand. So if you thought that I talked with my hands a lot before, just you wait.
Should we talk about the Odyssey?
Sing to me, O muse of a content-creating man, how he made a video reviewing what he said was every movie and TV adaptation of Homer's epic poem The Odyssey in preparation for this year's movie version from Christopher Nolan. And how many commenters informed him that he didn't really cover every existing version. There were some versions he deliberately left out and others he straight up missed. But he still said every version because this is an attention-based economy and he thought that was a good video title. Sue him. But now that the Nolan movie is out and I wanted to talk about it in a video, I thought I'd take the opportunity to watch and discuss some of the adaptations I didn't the first time around in addition to the Nolan one. Revisiting the story though got me thinking, while Queen Penelope is waiting on Ithaca for 20 years for her husband to return, all the while refusing to remarry, she probably could have used some products from today's sponsor, Bellesa Boutique. Now, Bellesa is a completely bi-women company whose mission is to empower everyone to embrace, explore, and celebrate their sexuality. And together, we're literally sending out free toys or gift cards to everyone who signs up for the giveaway linked below. So you can secure toys like the Thump, which utilizes Bellesa's improved pleasure jet technology to do it all. It vibrates, suctions, and thumps, obviously. The Tush, which is rechargeable and remote controlled, and whether you prefer a gentle hum or powerful pulse, it's guaranteed to, hit the spot. And the Halo 2, which would be perfect for when Odysseus finally comes home, as it's designed to enhance intimacy and help both partners reach new levels of pleasure. Then I know Achilles and Patroclus would probably enjoy the site's LGBTQ+ section, designed to celebrate every body, identity, and kind of desire. We're talking strap-ons, harnesses, all designed to help you explore, connect, and feel empowered in your pleasure journey. Again, free toys or gift cards to everyone who signs up for the giveaway linked below, and thanks again to Bellesa for sponsoring this video. So the first adaptation I wanted to look at today comes from The Asylum, an independent production company that since 1997 has put out low-budget direct-to-DVD and streaming films, like the Sharknado movies, as well as countless mockbusters of mainstream Hollywood releases. Like when Transformers came out, they made Transmorphers. Pixar releases Finding Dory, The Asylum releases Izzy's Way Home. And who needs Godzilla vs. Kong when you can watch Ape vs. Monster? The greatest of all time. Greatest what? Movie? Battle? You'll have to watch it to find out.
I think we've got a problem.
But in 2017, they came out with their own version of Homer's Odyssey titled Troy: The Odyssey, which according to Wikipedia was meant to be a mockbuster of the movie 300: Rise of an Empire. But that movie came out 3 years before this in 2014, so I'm not really sure what the motivation to make this was. But anyway, I put on this movie, and immediately, the flat, even lighting combined with the cheap costumes and mediocre acting, frankly, made it look a lot like a porno. Like any second, the actors were gonna start making out and stripping. And honestly, I kind of wish they did, because it probably would have made things more interesting. Yeah, this movie was pretty boring. It includes most of the adventures that most other adaptations do, but versions of them that are either extremely generic and forgettable, or just weird. Like the movie starts with Odysseus bidding farewell to a pregnant Penelope before he has to go fight in the Trojan War, and then moments after he leaves, she goes into labor. And nobody suggests going to get him from just down the hall. I'm sure he'd be allowed to stay behind just a little longer to witness the birth of his son. I think even Agamemnon would understand. They also combined Calypso and the Island of the Lotus Eaters into one plot point. But after Odysseus breaks free from the spell of the lotus flowers, he goes to do the same to his men. Me, after my friends say they just want to take it easy on our Friday night out, and all the young women who were pampering them are revealed to actually be elderly, to which the men react super disgusted.
What foul trick is this?
It is the trick of truth.
It's really mean. I think they even call them hags.
Why would we stay? To sleep with old hags? I would rather die by your side.
Like, I feel bad for those older actresses. But at least one of the crewmen who's older stays behind with them.
My wife in Ithaca is long dead now. I cannot see a better way to live my days with blind bliss.
He's like, I'm actually closer in age to these ladies, it's fine. I also love the light sprinkling of white in the men's hair to show that time has passed. There's a scene back on Ithaca where Antinous slaps Telemachus so that he falls off screen.
Stop!
And then the scene keeps going.
Choose! Choose from us now!
And going.
I swear it on the love of my true and eternal husband that I will choose.
And it never cuts back to Telemachus. Nobody, including his mother who's there, helps him up. Bro just got knocked out of sight and out of mind. The one thing mildly interesting this movie does is how it adapts the character of Circe. Sometimes when Odyssey adaptations include both Circe and Calypso, it ends up feeling a little redundant to me. Like, do we really need two magical women whom Odysseus lives and sleeps with for several years? But in this one, they reimagine Circe as like a Trojan warrior witch, who actually fights in the war and is even the one who kills Achilles. She's then brought on Odysseus's voyage home, surviving all the way until the end so that she can even join him in ridding his house of the suitors. Then a kraken shows up who was sent after Odysseus from Troy in this version, and she sacrifices herself to defeat it and save Ithaca. And as Odysseus carries her body away, he struggles a little, like he's waddling. And no shade, I would too, it's just funny. But yeah, Circe never has any romantic connection with Odysseus or any of the crewmen. She's just a warrior in her own right. And don't get me wrong, this wasn't like a super thoughtful, in-depth feminist reimagining of her character. They just made her like a generic token woman soldier character. But just giving credit for the movie doing something original. Other than that, I'm just confused as to how producing mockbusters like this manages to provide any sort of return on investment. Like back in the age of physical media, I could maybe see enough grandmas who knew their grandsons were into Transformers mistakenly buying Transmorphers DVDs to turn a profit, but were enough people still buying DVDs in 2017? Especially when this one doesn't even have a similar title to the movie it's supposedly a mockbuster of? Like maybe some people would watch this on streaming thinking it's a sequel to the Brad Pitt Troy, but then I feel they'd immediately turn it off once they realized it wasn't. Plus now it's available for free on YouTube, so what was the point? I almost feel like these people just wanted to dress up in costumes and sword fight, and thought that turning it into a cheap movie production was a way they could justify it. And if that was the case, I can't really be mad. Looks like they had fun. But the top comment under this on YouTube is, "This movie and others like it are the reason I generally stick to reading books," and it has 31 likes. What? You're gonna write off the entire art form of cinema based on a shitty version of the Odyssey you saw on YouTube? What a stupid and pretentious thing to say. But Troy: The Odyssey from 2017. Overall, I loved it. So with my first Odyssey video, the adaptation the comments seemed most disappointed that I didn't cover was the 1968 Italian miniseries.
Tu sai che io conosco un altro modo di potere. Questo.
And I'll admit, I did know about it and deliberately didn't include it just because it's 8 hours long and there doesn't exist an English dub. That just would have been a huge investment of time and attention for a video that I was trying to get out in a timely manner. But many of you claimed it was the most faithful adaptation of the original poem, so for this video, I watched it. And those claims were correct. It has the time to include every single little detail and plot beat from the poem. In including ones that few to none of the other adaptations do, like Odysseus sneaking into Troy and interacting with Helen, the Lotus Eaters as their own thing, the epilogue where a civil war almost breaks out on Ithaca, but then also elements like Scylla, Charybdis, and the Laestrygonian giants aren't depicted. And I'm sure that was a budgetary decision, and I don't want to sound like a child complaining that they left out everything except the action scenes. It's just that I view those as iconic elements of the story that I've been enjoying seeing in every new version I watch. So despite the overall faithfulness of this adaptation, I gotta admit, I was pretty bored watching it. And I think that was for a few reasons. One is that I don't have a ton of experience watching foreign language media with subtitles. I'm not an anime guy. But that being said, most of the foreign language media I have watched kept me more invested than this did. So I think it also had to do with the kind of muted, monotone performance that most of the actors gave.
Spianammo le mura di Troia. Io partii con Nestore e Menelao, ma un'improvvisa tempesta disperse tutta la flotta.
A choice that I'd guess was more of a directorial one, since all the actors seem to be doing it. It was like an overall tonal vibe this series was going for. Which is fine, it was just also a choice that resulted in me being a little bored. I think this series is a good example of how the most faithful adaptation of something isn't always necessarily the best one. Like, I just much prefer the 2 or 3 hour versions that, yes, leave out some of the plot points this one didn't, but also take more advantage of the fact that they're working in a visual medium. The only sequence in this one that I felt did that was Odysseus meeting the Shades in the underworld. I can imagine that having spooked some little Italian kids back in the day.
Mama, the ghosts on the Odyssey on the TV are scaring me.
You know, all those bilingual Italian children in the 60s? Overall, I'd say this adaptation is good if you want to know everything that happens in the poem, but for whatever reason really don't want to actually read it. But then again, unless you speak Italian, you'll still mostly be reading it. Also, it probably unfairly lost favor just for being like the 10th version of the Odyssey I watched at this point. And it had an especially tough act to follow because I watched it right after the 2026 highly anticipated adaptation brought to us by The Asylum. The Asylum made another one this year. So yeah, they wanted to do another mockbuster version to correspond with the Nolan one, and assuming that unlike the Cyclops Polyphemus you have semi-functioning eyeballs, you can probably tell that this version chose to depict a lot of the story using generative AI. And not just the fantasy elements. Also random scenes like Helen being carried away by soldiers and an arrow hitting a target. You guys seriously couldn't have figured out how to do those in camera? What's there to say? Odysseus has an interesting look in this one, bald with a ginger beard. I also like that his chest plate has nipples, but they rest nowhere near where his actual nipples would be. Penelope and Telemachus look way too close in age in this one to be mother and son. For most of it, it seems like Odysseus's crew only consists of like 4 or 5 guys. But then when they're sailing to escape Scylla, there are like 3 ships. Did he just have 2 more ships of men that we never see? This whole movie is just alternating between uninspired, boring dialogue scenes and hideous AI slop for an hour and 20 minutes. And then they change the ending of the story. There's only one suitor who gets killed by the Cyclops, who then like turns into water or something. I don't remember, I repressed it. But now Athena takes the form of it to haunt me. Not to sound dramatic, but I truly believe this thing is a disgrace to the art form of cinema. And I said I was surprised the 2017 Asylum one was able to turn a profit. This one came out this year. And it's not even streaming anywhere. It's only available to rent or buy on like one site, Fandango, I think. Are there seriously enough elderly people buying it accidentally thinking it's the Nolan one for it to be worth even the minimal time, money, and starved families of rabbits invested into making it? I doubt it. Plus, considering even those people probably didn't watch it after realizing what it actually was, there's a good chance I'm the only person alive who's watched this from beginning to end, and I don't know how I feel about that. But that brings us, of course, to the real 2026 adaptation, written and directed by Christopher Nolan, which in my original Odyssey video, I made the naive mistake of disclosing I was excited for. But for me, one of humanity's oldest stories being brought to life by one of its greatest living filmmakers, I can't help but be excited. And boy, I did not know when I said that how controversial of a statement that would be. It's gonna be a butchering of history by Nolan. Everything I've heard about the new Odyssey sounds like a malformed ego doing malformed ego things, feeding that ego while screwing the audience. I'm not going to pay for theater tickets to get subjected to that. Funding the Odyssey is propping up Hollywood, erasing Western culture and colors and making awful costumes, which the movie has awful colorless costumes. I predict Nolan's film is going to be dull, cheap-looking, poopy brown-colored, and heck of boring, like his Batman Begins film. Except it's going to be even worse because everyone speaks in Californian. Wait, I didn't know everybody in the new Odyssey spoke Californian specifically. So like, what's the Song of the Siren like? Dude, like, all the things you wanted to be, and then all the things you wished you never wished for. It's like a bodacious itch you want to scratch, but then you find it's under the skin and you can't reach it. So the bodacious itch becomes bogus. It told you that like what you most want is what you most can't have. And that the most you can't have is what you already had and lost. It was a song for all the promises I failed to keep. And it told me, I don't really want to go home, dude. But out of all the potentially controversial things that I've said in my videos, I did not expect that simply saying I was excited for the next movie from an Academy Award-winning director would be one of them. So before I talk about what I thought of the movie, I first just wanted to talk a little bit about the myriad of, to me, confusing reasons people were so sure it would be bad long before they even saw it. Most had to do with the movie's supposed lack of historical accuracy. The costumes, props, and most of the actors' ethnicities don't look like they actually would have at the end of the Mycenaean civilization when the story of the Odyssey is set. And while that is true, it personally didn't bother me at all, and I don't really think it's a problem. First, in regards to the costumes, armor, and like ships, the majority of people, including myself, would not know those aren't accurate to the period if we weren't told. Like, I'd wager most people, when reading or being told the story of the Odyssey, aren't picturing period accurate armor and ships in their head. I'm also pretty sure they're not historically accurate in any of the previous on-screen adaptations. And hell, it's not even accurate in most of the artwork we have depicting the story from throughout history. If you're a really hardcore history buff about like armor and ships specifically, I guess I could see you being disappointed that those elements aren't accurate to the era, but I guess I just don't understand why it would take away from your enjoyment of the movie too much after you accept that the movie is set in a fictional world where the armor and ships and things of the period look like this. The same way you accept it's a world where giants, cyclops, sirens, and sea monsters exist. And the same goes for the accents, because yes, in Christopher Nolan's version, most of the characters speak with a broadly American dialect.
My dad is coming home.
They're pining for a daddy you didn't even know. Like some sniveling bastard.
Which is different from many movies set in ancient times where they speak in an almost Shakespearean English dialect.
Nothing happens to anyone that he is not fitted by nature to bear.
But like historically, they wouldn't be speaking any type of English. So unless the detractors were expecting the movie to be entirely in Greek, which I don't think they were, they're basically saying the limit to their suspension of disbelief is hearing what historically would have been Mycenaean Greek as English, but not American English specifically. What's especially ridiculous to me about that complaint is this is far from the first movie to do this. Like, take a look at most of the historical epics Hollywood put out in the 50s and 60s. There are American accents all over those things.
Why a star falls and a bird doesn't. Where the sun goes at night.
Rome is strangling my people and my country, the whole earth.
I do not seek my reward in the world you live in.
I'm like totally Cleopatra right now. Then there's the most complex and complained about aspect of the movie's lack of historical accuracy, which is that none of the lead actors are of Greek ancestry. Now, more so than with the armor and the accents, I can understand why people might have been disappointed by this, as a big budget Odyssey adaptation like this would have been a great opportunity for lesser known actors of Greek ancestry to shine. Now, it really didn't take away from my personal enjoyment of the movie, both because the actors in this movie were announced before we even knew that it was going to be the Odyssey, so there was never even a window of time for me to anticipate a version with Greek actors, and also, I just really enjoyed the performances of most of the actors they went with, despite them not being Greek. Now, a common rebuttal to this is, oh, so you'd also be okay with Ryan Gosling playing Martin Luther King? Harriet Tubman biopic starring Sydney Sweeney, you'd be the first in line? And it's like, I don't know, personally, I just think ethnicity matters a little less when it comes to casting millennia-old mythological figures than it does relatively recent actual historical figures. Especially figures whose ethnicity is so closely tied to what they did. Like, it's not like Odysseus was a civil rights activist for ethnically Greek people. It's just a bad faith argument. All that being said, I'm not Greek. Well, apparently my DNA is like 2% Cretan, but I'm not that Greek. So if you are, and the lack of Greek actors in this movie completely ruined it for you, I'm not gonna argue. However, if that's truly your problem with this movie, that nobody's Greek, it only makes sense to be mad about the whole cast equally. But two of the non-Greek actors in the movie definitely received a disproportionate amount of hate to all the others. And those were Lupita Nyong'o and Elliot Page. I wonder why that is. Because after all, Matt Damon, Tom Holland, Robert Pattinson, none of them are Greek either. But they weren't the ones people were plastering all over their YouTube thumbnails lambasting the movie, or being complained about in the comments of every single video related to this movie leading up to its release. Like, even when I was watching the Italian version on YouTube, people were commenting under it, "This is so much better than Nolan's woke version." People really treated complaining about this movie like a full-time job. Now, of course, people claimed the reason Elliot Page deserved extra scrutiny was because Achilles is supposed to be the most powerful warrior, and Page is only 5'1".
Meaning we've gone from Brad Pitt to a girl who dresses as a guy who's 5'1", 118 pounds. That's the person that's going to be playing the greatest warrior in history, because to the left, that is normal.
But Elliot Page wasn't even playing Achilles. That was a rumor. In fact, his character Sinon being sort of petite and not especially suited for war, but nonetheless getting swept up in one and tragically sacrificed for the Greeks' victory over Troy, was kind of the point. Almost like you should wait to actually see a movie before you make snap judgments about it. But as for the disproportionate hate for Lupita Nyong'o playing Helen of Troy, I never really heard anything resembling a valid argument for it. And in reality, I think a lot of the outrage about both of these actors, and in turn the movie in general, stemmed from many people viewing previous historical action movies as sort of a cinematic safe space for them, where they don't have to deal with woke shit like black and trans people. And they were disappointed this movie wasn't continuing in that tradition. But also, combined, those actors are maybe in the movie for like 8 minutes total. Plus, Elliot Page's character isn't even trans, he's just trans. Full transparency, I think that every internet anti-woke hate campaign surrounding a movie has been stupid, but this one seemed especially forced to me, because like, one, regardless of if you like everything on Christopher Nolan's filmography, I thought we were all pretty much in agreement that Oppenheimer was pretty damn good. You at least can't deny that it was incredibly successful. So to act so sure that his first movie following that would be a dumpster fire and a flop is just a weird bet to place. And two, this movie is auteur-driven, filmed on location, uses mostly practical effects, and isn't even really part of an existing franchise. Isn't that kind of the antithesis to the written by committee, mostly CGI franchise slop that everyone, including the anti-woke crowd, is tired of seeing from Hollywood? I'm confused why they would want to cheer on the failure of something like that. So yeah, I've kind of been dancing around it, but if you haven't figured it out by now, I fucking love this movie. Every sequence from the Cyclops, to Circe, to the Siren Song, to Scylla and Charybdis, have never been adapted for the screen with this level of resources and cinematic artistry. Like here, all those things feel cool and genuinely investing, as opposed to just a welcome alternative to usual English class activities, which is the best I could say about most of the other adaptations. With maybe the exception of The Return, but that didn't adapt the whole story like this one did, just the ending. It's really hard for me to pick a favorite scene, but bow and arrow to my head, I'd probably have to go with Polyphemus's cave. I especially love his almost accordion-sounding voice. Like, yeah, when you think about it, a creature that big wouldn't just sound like a normal human guy. But really, someone could say any sequence in this movie was their favorite, and I'd completely understand. That's how good they all are. I also loved pretty much every performance. I know some people were saying they can't hear Tom Holland doing an American accent without thinking of Spider-Man, but I almost think that was a little deliberate. Because you could almost view coming-of-age stories like Spider-Man as an evolution of a storytelling tradition originated by Telemachus and the Odyssey. Also, side note, I love the new Spider-Man as well. It's just a great year for movies. I know Agamemnon's historically inaccurate armor was a big point of discussion leading up to the movie, but I personally loved it in context. Like every other on-screen depiction of the Trojan War that I've seen, Agamemnon's just a guy. He's Brian Cox walking around. But the decision here to make him this shadowy, ominous, Darth Vader-esque figure whose ambition is to blame for the entire Trojan War, I thought was great, as well as the fact that we never hear him speak until Odysseus meets his shade in the underworld and he's been humbled. My friend and I joked that after he drank the sacrifice blood, allowing him to speak, he'd sound like, "Hey, Odysseus!" I also love that the movie establishes no, the Trojan War wasn't literally fought over Helen. Agamemnon just wanted control of Troy and used his sister-in-law's affair as an excuse. Also saying that, I'm realizing Helen is his sister-in-law in two ways. Now yes, the movie was far from a one-to-one adaptation of the source material. This is very much Nolan's take on the Odyssey, and thus includes a lot of changes and additions to the original story. But honestly, pretty much all of them I was a fan of. Most changes I feel had to do with Odysseus as a character, and I feel the intention of a lot of them was to make him a more likable hero for modern audiences. And I know a lot of people consider that an offensive degradation of Homer's original text, but I personally disagree. Like, not only is the Odyssey in the public domain, so people are allowed to reinterpret it however they want, but also I feel Nolan is trying to make the story feel to us how it did to the ancient people who first heard it. And there are just some aspects to Odysseus's character that modern audiences would be less forgiving of than ancient ones, especially for someone who's supposed to be the hero of the story. Like, a small example is that we never see him be deliberately unfaithful to Penelope. He doesn't sleep with Circe, and even if it can be assumed he sleeps with Calypso, it's while the lotus flower is like clouding his memories. The whole movie, he really only has eyes for Penelope, a certified wife guy. Also, him being partially responsible for the Greeks' victory over Troy, in other words, the brutal pillaging of a whole city of civilians, isn't viewed by Odysseus or the movie as something heroic. It's something he feels deep remorse over, blaming himself for the entire collapse of the Bronze Age. But it's also explained to us that that and every other of Odysseus's choices were made with the underlying intent of protecting as many of his people as possible. Like, he only agreed to fight in the war in the first place because Agamemnon would have invaded Ithaca otherwise. And every other instance on the long journey home where he had to sacrifice some of his men was always done with the intention of a majority getting home alive. He might not even agree with me, but Odysseus in this movie is objectively a good king to his people. I'm sorry, man, I really like this movie. Then the other change this makes to the original story is making the literal existence of the gods more open to interpretation. The only one we actually see being Zendaya's Athena, who turns out to be just the vision of an innocent woman who was murdered during the sacking of Troy haunting Odysseus. And while this is a big change, it's again one that I personally liked. Because you know where else the existence of the divine is uncertain? Real life. It makes it more relatable. relatable. We don't know how much of our lives we're truly able to control before we should surrender to the unknowable whims of the universe. Universal timeless themes. And you might argue, okay, but why make the existence of the gods ambiguous but not all the other supernatural elements of the story? Like, is it a grounded retelling or not? And to that, I'd ask, are you sure their existence isn't ambiguous either? I mean, we only hear about all of them through the framing device of Odysseus recounting them to Calypso as his memories are returning after years of consuming the lotus flower. Maybe the memories are returning altered slightly to make the trauma of how he actually lost his men more palatable. I don't know, I think there's a lot to speculate and discuss about this movie, and I personally really like that. Overall, I just loved it and could talk about it forever. But I know not everyone did, and to be fair, not everyone who disliked it is part of the anti-woke crowd. Again, maybe you're a Greek person or hardcore history buff who just couldn't get past the historical inaccuracies. I know many people, including Emily Wilson, whose translation of the Odyssey was supposedly Nolan's primary inspiration in writing the film, felt his portrayal of the women of the story left something to be desired. And that's fine. Art is subjective, opinions will vary. But when I saw this movie, opening weekend in 70mm IMAX, the moment where Odysseus strummed his bow and shot it through the axe heads, and the suitor played by Cory Booker realized who he was only to get immediately shot, my audience cheered. For a fucking auditorium of people in 2026 to be that invested in a dramatic beat that was conceived 3,000 years ago was such a cool, beautiful thing to me that I couldn't help but love this movie. My affection for it was involuntary. However, I know that in response to me saying that, a lot of this movie's detractors are going to accuse me of being a stupid, shallow, woke, barking seal NPC shill who was paid by Universal to give a positive review. And honestly, that's why I often despise modern internet film discourse. People just seem so eager to immediately label movies as either woke or problematic, and make judgments about people's character based on whether they did or didn't enjoy something. And I don't want this to come across as me being an anti-intellectual, it's not that deep kind of person. We should look at things critically, obviously. But I hate that film is just being used as another tool to get us to hate each other. And it's like, of all the things to get mad at other people over in 2026, we're doing it over entertainment preferences now? Movies should be a fun thing that unite us. Anyway, that's pretty much it. I know there are still some other adaptations of the Odyssey that I've yet to watch and talk about, so maybe if this video does well too, I'll make a part 3. I also think watching every adaptation of the Iliad could be fun, or maybe like the Book of Exodus, but how would I dress up for that one? Anyway, will somebody get these beggars out of here?